Welcome to Whispering Pines. In 1877, where a woman's life changed the second her boot touched Arkansas dirt, and the whole town decided who she was, before she could say otherwise. Elsie Brennan climbed down from the Butterfield stage, with dust in her hair and hope in her chest, ready to file her homestead claim and start the life she'd planned alone since leaving St. Louis 3 weeks back. The wind hit her first, then the stairs, then the sheriff's hand on her arm before she'd taken 5 steps.
"Ma'am, you need to come with me right now."
His voice wasn't kind.
"I just arrived, sir. I haven't done anything wrong."
The sheriff's grip tightened.
"You're Clara Devlin. Your husband robbed the Denver and Rio Grande last month and killed 2 guards doing it. We got a wire 2 days ago saying you'd be on this stage."
Elsie's stomach dropped clean through to her boots.
"My name is Elsie Brennan. I'm a homesteader from Missouri. I've never been married and I don't know anyone named Devlin."
"That's what they all say."
He pulled her toward the squat log building that served as both jail and land office, and the crowd that had gathered started murmuring like a nest of wasps. Elsie saw women pulling their children back, saw men's hands drifting toward gun belts, saw the fear and anger in faces that had decided her guilt before she'd spoken a word. She tried to pull free, but the sheriff's hand was iron.
"Please, check my papers. My claim documents are in my bag."
"We'll check everything, but you're staying locked up until we sort this out."
He shoved her through the door, and Elsie's independent streak flared hot enough to burn.
"You can't just lock me up without proof."
In Whispering Pines, I can do whatever keeps folks safe.
The cell door clanged shut, and Elsie gripped the bars, watching through the single window as the wind picked up, and the sky started turning the color of old bruises. Grant Fletcher leaned against the wall outside the jail and pressed his hand against the bullet wound in his shoulder that hadn't stopped seeping since Tucson. He'd ridden shotgun on that same stage Elsie had arrived on, but he'd climbed down 2 stops early because the Devlin gang had a price on his head, and Whispering Pines seemed remote enough to hide in until he healed. Now he watched through the jail window as the sheriff interrogated the woman with auburn hair, and he knew with absolute certainty she wasn't Clara Devlin. He'd seen Clara Devlin's face on wanted posters from Kansas to California, and this woman's eyes were wrong. Her cheekbones were wrong. Her whole manner was wrong. Clara Devlin was a hardened accomplice who'd slit throats for pocket change. This woman looked like she'd break before she bent, and Grant recognized that stubborn independence because it matched his own. But if he walked in there and vouched for her, the sheriff would ask questions Grant couldn't answer. Where had he seen Clara Devlin's face? Why did he know so much about the Devlin gang? Why was a stagecoach guard from Colorado Territory hiding in an Arkansas mining camp with a bullet wound he wouldn't explain? Grant's calm ran deep as river water, but it had limits, and watching an innocent woman take the blame for crimes she didn't commit was testing every one of them. The wind gusted hard enough to rattle the jail's shutters, and Grant made his decision. He pushed through the door, and the sheriff looked up sharp.
"That's not Clara Devlin."
The sheriff's eyes narrowed.
"And who the hell are you?"
Grant kept his voice level and his hand away from his gun.
"Grant Fletcher. I rode guard on the stage she came in on. I've seen Clara Devlin's wanted poster in every town, from Denver to El Paso. That woman in your cell doesn't match."
Elsie's head snapped up, and her blue eyes locked on Grant's face with desperate hope. The sheriff stood and crossed his arms.
"You got proof of that? Or just your word?"
Grant met his stare without blinking.
My word's been good enough to keep passengers alive for 6 years. Clara Devlin's got a scar across her left eyebrow, and she's shorter by 3 inches. Check the description on the wire.
The sheriff walked to his desk and pulled out a crumpled telegram, scanned it, then looked at Elsie with slightly less certainty.
Says here, Clara Devlin's got brown eyes.
He looked at Elsie.
Turn toward the light.
Elsie stepped closer to the window, and the fading stormlight caught her eyes clear and blue as a Missouri sky. The sheriff cursed under his breath.
Then who the hell is she?
I'm Elsie Brennan, like I've been saying. I have papers.
The sheriff pulled her bag from under his desk and dumped the contents on the scarred wood. Homestead documents, a letter of credit from a St. Louis bank, a worn Bible with her mother's name inscribed inside. He read through the papers twice, then unlocked the cell.
Looks like we made a mistake, Miss Brennan.
Elsie stepped out, and her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady.
I'd like my things back, and directions to the land office.
Land office is closed until the storm passes. Whole town's shutting down.
He handed her the bag and avoided her eyes.
Then, I'll need a room.
Try the boarding house 2 streets over.
Elsie walked past Grant without a word, but he saw the rigid set of her shoulders and knew she was holding herself together by pure will. He followed her out into the wind that was now strong enough to send roof shingles skittering across the dirt like playing cards.
Miss Brennan.
She stopped, but didn't turn.
Thank you for speaking up.
You'll want to find shelter fast. This storm's going to get worse before it gets better.
She nodded and started walking toward the cluster of buildings the sheriff had indicated, and Grant fell into step beside her, because his shoulder was throbbing, and he had nowhere else to go, and something about her pulled at him, like a current he couldn't fight. The wind hit them like a living thing, and Elsie grabbed the porch railing to keep from being knocked sideways. Grant's hand shot out to steady her, and the movement made him gasp. Elsie saw the blood then, spreading dark across his vest, and her training from helping her father doctor livestock kicked in before she could think.
You're hurt.
I'm fine.
You're bleeding through your shirt. How long have you been wounded?
Long enough.
His jaw was tight, and his face had gone pale under the trail dust. Elsie made a choice.
The boarding house can wait. You need that wound cleaned before infection sets in.
I can handle it.
With one arm and no supplies in the middle of a windstorm. Don't be stupid.
The word came out sharper than she meant, but Grant's mouth twitched in something almost like a smile.
Yes, ma'am.
They made it to the boarding house as the first fat drops of rain started falling. The landlady took one look at Grant's shoulder and pointed them to a back room without asking questions. Elsie got him sitting on the narrow bed and peeled the vest off as gently as she could. The bullet had gone clean through, but the wound was angry and hot.
When did this happen?
4 days ago. Tucson.
And you've been on a stagecoach since then.
Didn't have much choice.
Elsie went to the washstand and poured water into the basin, found clean cloth in the drawer, and came back to find Grant watching her with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense.
This is going to hurt.
I've had worse.
She cleaned the wound, and Grant didn't make a sound, but his breathing went shallow, and his knuckles went white where he gripped the bed frame. Elsie worked fast and careful, the way her father had taught her with colicky horses and cut cattle. When she finished bandaging, she sat back and met his eyes.
You need rest, and you need to keep that clean.
Why are you helping me?
Because you helped me when you didn't have to.
Outside, the wind screamed, and something heavy crashed against the building. The oil lamp flickered.
Storm's getting bad.
The landlady said it'll last through tomorrow at least.
Elsie stood and moved to the window. The street was empty now. Shutters battened, doors barred. Whispering Pines had pulled itself tight against the weather.
I need to file my claim as soon as the land office opens.
You really planning to homestead out here alone?
I've been planning it for 2 years. Saved every penny. I'm not going back to St. Louis to marry some store clerk my mother picked out.
Grant heard the steel in her voice and recognized it.
Independent to a fault.
Is that a criticism?
An observation.
Lightning flashed, and thunder followed close enough to rattle the window glass. Elsie turned from the window, and Grant saw the exhaustion creeping into her face now that the adrenaline was fading.
I should let you rest.
Stay.
The word came out before he could stop it. Elsie looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition, or understanding, or the simple fact that they were both strangers in a hostile place, with no one else to trust.
I'll stay until the storm eases.
She pulled the chair from the corner and sat by the window, and Grant lay back on the bed and let the pain and exhaustion take him under. When he woke, it was full dark, and the wind was worse, a constant howl that sounded like all the fury in the world trying to tear the town apart. Elsie was still in the chair, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the chaos.
You should sleep.
Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that cell and feel everyone looking at me like I'm guilty.
They were wrong.
But they believed it so fast. Like it didn't matter what I said.
Grant sat up slowly, testing his shoulder.
People see what they expect to see. Especially in a place like this, where everyone's running from something.
What are you running from?
The question hung in the air between them. Grant could lie, but something about Elsie made lying feel impossible.
The Devlin gang put a price on my head after I killed 2 of theirs, defending a payroll shipment. I've been moving ever since.
So you really did recognize Clara Devlin?
I've seen her work. She's nothing like you.
Elsie stood and moved closer, and in the lamplight, her face was open and honest, in a way Grant hadn't seen in years of guarding stages and watching his back.
Thank you for telling me the truth.
Seemed only fair after you patched me up.
The building shook, and somewhere in the distance timber cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. Elsie flinched, and Grant stood, moved to the window beside her. The street was a river of mud and debris now, and across the way a saloon's false front peeled away and crashed into the muck.
We're going to be stuck here a while.
I know.
She didn't move away, and neither did he. Outside the storm raged, and inside the silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with things neither of them knew how to say yet. Morning came gray and angry, and the wind hadn't quit. Elsie woke in the chair with a crick in her neck and found Grant already up, testing his shoulder with careful movements.
How does it feel?
Better. You did good work.
The landlady brought coffee and cornbread and news that 3 buildings had lost their roofs in the night, and the land office wouldn't open until the weather broke. Elsie ate in silence and tried not to think about her dwindling funds or the claim that might get filed by someone else if she waited too long. After breakfast, she and Grant ventured into the main room where other stranded travelers huddled around the stove. The talk was all about the storm and the mining camp's troubles. A grizzled prospector with tobacco-stained teeth held court. The prospector said Satterfield Wainwright was buying up claims left and right, pushing folks out with threats and legal tricks, planning to sell the whole camp to some Eastern investors before the real payday hit. The prospector said Wainwright was neat as a banker and twice as ruthless, never forgot a slight, and always collected his debts. Elsie listened and felt cold settle in her stomach. She'd heard of claim jumpers, but hadn't expected to walk straight into a nest of them. Grant stood by the window, watching the street, his hand resting easy near his gun in a way that said he'd done this 1,000 times before. A man in a black suit appeared in the doorway, shaking rain from his hat. He was tall and thin with pale eyes and hands so clean they looked scrubbed. Satterfield Wainwright. He scanned the room and his gaze stopped on Grant. Wainwright's voice was smooth as oil. He said he'd heard there was a new guard in town, someone who'd worked the Denver routes, someone who might know things about certain shipments and schedules. Grant turned slow, and his expression stayed calm, but Elsie saw the tension in his shoulders.
I don't discuss my work with strangers.
Wainwright smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. He said he paid well for information, and he had friends who remembered favors. Grant didn't answer, and Wainwright's smile thinned. He said he'd be in touch and left, his boots making no sound on the floorboards. The room stayed quiet after he was gone. Elsie moved to Grant's side.
What was that about?
Trouble.
What kind?
The kind that doesn't take no for an answer.
He looked at her, and his green eyes were serious.
You should stay clear of me. Wainwright's the type who uses leverage, and if he finds out we're connected, he'll use you to get to me.
We barely know each other.
Doesn't matter. He saw us together. That's enough.
Elsie's jaw set.
I'm not hiding from him. I have a claim to file and a life to start.
Then file it, and get out of Whispering Pines fast as you can.
What about you?
I'll handle Wainwright.
Alone. And wounded.
I've managed this long.
Elsie wanted to argue, but the landlady called them to the window. The wind had shifted, and the rain was coming sideways now, hard enough to strip bark from the cottonwoods lining the creek. The street was a torrent, and the bridge that connected the camp to the cliffside mesa where the best claims lay had started to sway. Grant cursed under his breath.
If that bridge goes, no one's getting to the land office for weeks.
Then I need to cross now.
You'll get swept away.
I'll take that risk.
Grant grabbed her arm.
Don't be a fool.
Don't tell me what to do.
They glared at each other, and the room went quiet. Finally, Grant let go and stepped back.
If you're set on dying, I'm not going to stop you.
Elsie grabbed her coat and headed for the door. The wind hit her like a fist, and the rain stung her face like thrown gravel. She made it 3 steps before Grant was beside her, his hand on her elbow, steering her toward the bridge.
I thought you weren't going to stop me.
I'm not stopping you. I'm making sure you don't drown.
They reached the bridge, and Elsie saw immediately that Grant was right. The wooden planks were slick, and the support ropes were stretched tight as bowstrings. Water churned brown and furious below. But on the far side, the land office sat solid and dry, and Elsie's whole future waited behind that door. She stepped onto the bridge, and it swayed under her weight. Grant followed, and his presence steadied her more than she wanted to admit. They were halfway across when the bridge lurched, and Elsie's foot slipped. Grant's arm shot out and caught her around the waist, hauling her against his chest. For a moment they stood frozen, breath coming hard, rain pouring down their faces.
I'm okay.
No, you're not. Neither am I. But we're going to make it anyway.
They moved forward step by careful step, the bridge groaning and swaying with each movement. A tree limb swept past below, close enough that Elsie felt the spray. Then they were on solid ground, and the land office door was right there. Elsie pushed it open, and they stumbled inside, dripping and shaking. The clerk behind the desk looked up in shock. The clerk said the office was closed, and they needed to leave. Elsie pulled her sodden papers from inside her coat and slapped them on the desk.
I'm filing a homestead claim. Right now.
The clerk started to protest, but Grant stepped forward, and the look on his face made the words die.
The lady's filing her claim.
The clerk took the papers and read through them with shaking hands, stamped them, recorded the claim in his ledger, and handed Elsie a receipt. She clutched it like a lifeline.
Thank you.
They stepped back into the storm, and Elsie felt something loosen in her chest. She'd done it. The claim was hers. Whatever else happened, she had this. Grant was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read.
Congratulations.
Thank you for getting me here.
You'd have made it without me.
Maybe. But I'm glad you came.
The bridge swayed worse on the way back, and they had to stop twice to let the worst gusts pass. By the time they reached the boarding house, Elsie's hands were numb, and her legs felt like water. The landlady wrapped them in blankets and pushed hot coffee into their hands. The other guests stared and whispered. That night, the storm peaked, and the wind tore shingles and siding, and anything not nailed down 3 times over. Elsie and Grant sat in his room because it was safer than being alone, and because neither of them wanted to pretend otherwise anymore.
Why did you really come with me to the bridge?
Because you reminded me of someone.
Who?
Me. 10 years ago, before I learned that being independent doesn't mean being stupid.
Elsie smiled despite herself.
Are you calling me stupid?
I'm calling you brave and reckless, and probably going to get yourself killed if someone doesn't watch your back.
And you're volunteering.
Seems like it.
The lamp flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by lightning flashes. Elsie heard Grant move, and then his hand found hers, warm and steady.
I need to tell you something.
What?
Wainwright's planning something big. I heard talk in Tucson before I left. A train heist. The Denver and Rio Grande's running a payroll shipment through next week, and Wainwright's got men positioned all along the route.
Why are you telling me?
Because if it happens, this town's finished. The railroad will pull out, and the investors will disappear, and everyone here will lose everything, including your claim.
What can we do?
I can stop it. But it'll cost me the one thing I swore I'd never give up.
What's that?
My promise to stay out of it. I swore when I left Colorado that I was done fighting other people's battles, done bleeding for strangers. But if I walk away from this, innocent people die, and you lose everything you worked for.
Elsie's throat tightened.
Don't do it for me.
Too late.
Lightning flashed, and in the brief light Elsie saw Grant's face. Saw the resolve there, and the conflict, and something else that made her heart kick hard against her ribs.
What do you need from me?
Stay safe. Stay out of Wainwright's way. And if something happens to me, get on the first stage out, and don't look back.
I'm not leaving you.
Elsie,
I mean it. You don't get to save me and then disappear. That's not how this works.
how what works?
She couldn't answer because she didn't have words for what was building between them. Fast and fierce and terrifying. So instead, she leaned in and kissed him. And Grant went still for half a heartbeat before his hand came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back like she was air. And he'd been drowning. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard.
That complicates things.
Good.
He laughed, low and rough, and pulled her close. They sat together in the dark while the storm raged and made plans that were probably going to get them both killed. By morning, the wind had finally died, and the rain had slowed to a cold drizzle. Whispering Pines looked like a war zone, buildings stripped and broken, streets buried in mud and debris. But people emerged from their shelters and started cleaning up, because that's what people did. Elsie helped the landlady clear fallen timber from the porch, while Grant went to scout Wainwright's operation. He came back 2 hours later with a grim expression.
It's happening tonight. Wainwright's got 8 men riding out at dusk to hit the train at Copper Creek Pass.
How do you know?
I made it my business to know.
What's your plan?
Ride out ahead of them and warn the train.
Alone.
I move faster alone.
Not with that shoulder, you don't.
Grant started to argue, but Elsie cut him off.
I can ride, and I can shoot. My father made sure of that. You need someone watching your back.
If Wainwright finds out you helped me, he'll come after you.
Let him try.
Grant looked at her for a long moment, and then nodded.
We leave in an hour. Bring whatever you can't afford to lose.
Elsie packed her few belongings and met Grant at the livery. He'd saddled 2 horses and loaded supplies. They rode out under a sky still heavy with clouds, following the stage road north toward the pass. The country opened up into pine forest and rocky draws, beautiful and harsh. They pushed hard and didn't talk much, saving their breath for the miles. As the sun started sinking, they reached a high overlook, and Grant pulled up. Below them, the railroad tracks cut through the pass, a narrow defile with steep sides and nowhere to run.
They'll hit the train right there. Set charges on the tracks to stop it, then surround it and take the payroll car.
How do we stop them?
We don't. We warn the train and let the railroad guards handle it.
And if the guards aren't enough,
Then we help.
They waited as the light faded and the temperature dropped. Elsie huddled in her coat and Grant kept watch, his green eyes scanning the rocks for movement. Then they heard it. Hoofbeats coming fast from the south. Wainwright's men, riding in formation, confident and ready. Grant and Elsie pulled back into the trees and let them pass. Once they were out of sight, Grant spurred his horse down toward the tracks. They reached the pass just as the train's whistle sounded in the distance, a lonesome wail that echoed off the rocks. Grant flagged down the engineer and shouted up to him about the ambush. The engineer cursed and pulled the brake, the train screeching to a halt well short of the charges. Railroad guards poured out of the cars, rifles ready, and formed a defensive line. Wainwright's men came charging out of the rocks, expecting easy pickings, and ran straight into a wall of gunfire. The fight was short and brutal. 2 of Wainwright's men went down in the first volley, and the rest scattered, trying to find cover in the pass. Grant and Elsie stayed mounted on the ridge, watching the chaos below. Then, Elsie spotted movement to the west. A single rider breaking away from the fight and heading back toward town.
That's Wainwright. He's running.
He won't get far.
But Grant's face was tight, with something darker than satisfaction. Elsie knew what he was thinking. Wainwright would reach town before them, and he'd take out his rage on anyone he thought had crossed him. They had to get back first. They rode hard through the gathering dark, the horses lathered and blowing. The trail was rough and treacherous, but they didn't slow down. When they finally reached the edge of town, the streets were quiet. Too quiet. Lamps burned in a few windows, but most of the buildings were still dark from storm damage. Grant pulled up at the main street and dismounted, favoring his bad shoulder.
Stay with the horses.
Not a chance.
They moved through the shadows toward the claims office. The door was standing open, and light spilled out into the mud. Inside, they found Wainwright at his desk, burning papers in a metal basin. He looked up when they entered, and his face twisted with fury. Wainwright stood slowly, his neat coat buttoned despite everything, his eyes cold and calculating.
It's over, Wainwright. Your men are dead or captured, and the railroad knows everything.
Wainwright smiled, a thin, humorless expression.
You think that matters? I've already sold the claims. The money's been transferred. By tomorrow, I'll be in Mexico, and you'll still be here trying to prove I did anything wrong.
We have witnesses. The engineer, the guards, your own men.
Bought witnesses. Men who'll say whatever I pay them to say. You've got nothing.
Grant took a step forward, and Wainwright's hand dropped to the gun at his belt.
Don't.
But Wainwright was already drawing. Grant moved faster than Elsie would have thought possible with his injured shoulder, closing the distance and slamming Wainwright back against the desk. The gun clattered to the floor, and Wainwright went down hard, gasping. Grant stood over him, fists clenched, and for a moment Elsie thought he might actually kill him. Then, Grant stepped back and picked up the gun.
You're done.
The sheriff arrived minutes later with 2 deputies, alerted by the railroad guards who'd ridden in behind them. They took Wainwright into custody along with his remaining men. The claims office was sealed and an investigation opened. It would take weeks to sort out the mess, but the immediate threat was over. Elsie and Grant walked back through the quiet streets as dawn started breaking over the mesa. The wind had finally stopped, and the air smelled clean, washed by the storm. They reached the boarding house and stood on the porch, neither one wanting to say goodbye.
What will you do now?
Depends.
On what?
On whether you're really married to a man in Dodge City.
Elsie looked at him, this calm, dangerous man who'd risked everything to protect a town that wasn't even his. And she made her choice.
I'm not married. I never was. I made that up because I needed people to leave me alone.
Why?
Because I was running from something ugly back east, and I wanted a fresh start. I thought if people believed I was waiting for a husband, they'd stop asking questions.
What were you running from?
A man who thought he owned me. A family that agreed with him. I left, and I'm not going back.
Grant nodded slowly, his green eyes searching her face.
Good.
Good?
Because I'm not letting you go.
He kissed her then, right there on the porch in the gray morning light, and Elsie felt something inside her unlock, some tight, scared thing she'd been holding on to for too long. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling.
Where do we go from here?
I've got some money saved. Enough to buy a piece of land if we're careful. Maybe down by the river where the water's good.
You want to stay in Whispering Pines.
I want to stay with you. The place doesn't matter.
3 weeks later, a telegram arrived at the boarding house, forwarded from the stage company. Elsie opened it with shaking hands, afraid it might be news from her past catching up. Instead, it was from Grant's former employer, offering him his old job back with a raise and a promotion. She found Grant at the livery where he was repairing fence posts and showed him the telegram. He read it carefully and then handed it back.
Not interested.
Grant, this is a good offer. Real money. Security.
I've got security. I've got you.
But
No buts. I spent 10 years riding for other people, protecting their money and their property. I'm done with that. I want to build something of my own.
Elsie folded the telegram and put it in her pocket.
then, let's build it.
They found their land a month later, 20 acres along the river with good grass and a stand of cottonwoods for shade. The seller was an old prospector, heading back east, and he let them have it cheap because he liked the way they looked at each other. They spent the summer clearing brush and building a small cabin, working side by side in the heat. Grant's shoulder healed slow but steady, and Elsie proved she could swing an axe as well as any man. By autumn, they had walls and a roof, and a door that closed tight. They got married in October, a simple ceremony at the church with half the town in attendance. The preacher kept it short, and Grant's vows were shorter, just a promise to stand by her no matter what came. Elsie promised the same. That night they sat outside the cabin under the cottonwood tree, wrapped in blankets with coffee growing cold in their cups. The stars were bright and sharp overhead, and the river whispered in the darkness.
Do you ever regret it? Giving up the job, staying here,
Not once.
even when the money's tight.
Especially then. Money comes and goes. But this, what we've got, that's forever.
Elsie leaned against his shoulder, careful of the old wound, and listened to the night sounds. Somewhere an owl called, and the cottonwood leaves rustled in the breeze.
What happens when winter comes?
We'll face it together. Same as everything else.
Together.
Together.
And sitting there in the darkness with the man she loved beside her, and a home of their own rising solid behind them, Elsie Brennan believed him. She was mistaken for another woman, and he nearly died protecting her secret. In 1877, Elsie Brennan arrives in Whispering Pines, Arkansas, with a dangerous lie, claiming to be a married woman to escape her past. When wounded stagecoach guard Grant Fletcher discovers her secret during a violent windstorm, he risks everything to protect her from a ruthless claim jumper plotting to destroy the town. As a deadly train heist unfolds and bullets fly in Copper Creek Pass, Elsie and Grant must choose between safety and truth. This Wild West romance delivers danger, deception, and a hard-won happy ending under the cottonwood trees. Subscribe for more authentic Western love stories, where resilience meets romance on the frontier. Wild West Romance, Western Love Story, Frontier Romance, 1877 Arkansas, Stagecoach Guard Romance, Homesteader Woman, Claim Jumper Villain, Train Heist, Windstorm Survival, Cottonwood Tree Ending, Authentic Western, Historical Romance, Cowboy Love Story, Dangerous Frontier, Mistaken Identity Romance, Colorized Late 1800s American West Photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting. No text, no watermark. A stunningly beautiful woman in her late 20s, with rich chestnut brown hair pinned in a practical bun. Warm brown eyes filled with determination and fear. Wearing a dark green wool dress with a fitted bodice and a cream-colored shawl clutched around her shoulders. Stands pressed against the weathered wooden wall of a building as wind whips her skirt. A ruggedly handsome man in his mid-30s with dark brown hair, intense green eyes, strong jaw, wearing a dark brown duster coat over a blue shirt and leather vest. Black cowboy hat. Reaches protectively toward her with one arm braced against the wall beside her head, his other hand on his holstered gun, shielding her body with his, as debris flies past them in the violent windstorm. His expression shows fierce protective intensity mixed with pain from his shoulder wound, while her face shows both terror and trust as she grips his coat. Background shows the main street of Whispering Pines during the windstorm, with torn roof shingles flying through the air. A wooden boardwalk railing in the foreground. The blurred facade of a saloon in the midground, with a swinging damaged sign. And dark storm clouds with harsh gray stormlight casting attic shadows. The palette is darker, with warm beige and amber undertones. The scene lit by diffused, stormy daylight that creates a sense of immediate danger. Foreground elements include wind-kicked dust and loose papers swirling past their boots. Midground shows a rain barrel tipped on its side and broken fence boards. Background includes the silhouette of other damaged buildings and a rider barely visible through the storm. Photorealistic cinematic style. Shot on cinema camera. Natural golden hour lighting. Shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background. Warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic. Professional portrait photog. RAFI-quality.0/TD up. Warning him about the ambush ahead. The engineer was skeptical until Grant described Wainwright's operation in detail. Then the man's face went pale, and he ordered the train to stop. The railroad guards climbed down, 6 hard-faced men with rifles and shotguns. Grant explained the situation, and the head guard, a gray-haired veteran named Drummond, listened carefully.
How many men does Wainwright have?
Grant told him 8, maybe 9. Drummond nodded and started deploying his men along the tracks, using the terrain for cover. Grant and Elsie took positions on the high side of the pass, where they could see both approaches. The wait wasn't long. Wainwright's men came riding in just as full dark settled, confident and loud. They had explosives and tools, ready to tear up the tracks. But when they rounded the bend and saw the train sitting still with guards positioned and rifles aimed, they pulled up short. There was a tense moment of silence. Then Wainwright himself rode forward, immaculate even in the dust, his dark suit pressed, and his expression cold. The claim jumper leader dismounted and walked toward Drummond with his hands visible. But his eyes were calculating every angle. He started talking, smooth and reasonable, claiming this was all a misunderstanding, that his men were simply escorting a shipment. Drummond wasn't buying it. The guard told Wainwright to turn around and ride back to town, and that he'd be reporting this to the authorities. Wainwright's face didn't change, but his hand moved slightly toward his coat. That's when Grant stood up from his cover and called down.
Don't do it. Wainwright.
The claim jumper froze and looked up, recognition flashing in his eyes.
You're done. The town knows what you've been doing. The railroad knows. Walk away now, or face a rope.
Wainwright's expression shifted from cold calculation to pure rage. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. And for a man who never forgot a slight, that was unforgivable. He pointed up at Grant and shouted orders to his men. Guns came out, and the night exploded into chaos. Elsie dropped flat as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. Grant returned fire, his revolver barking in the darkness. Below, the railroad guards opened up with a disciplined volley that scattered Wainwright's men. 2 went down immediately. The rest scrambled for cover. The firefight was brief and brutal. Wainwright tried to rally his men, but they were outgunned and outpositioned. One by one, they threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Wainwright himself stood alone in the middle of the chaos, his neat suit now dusty, his face a mask of fury. Drummond walked up and disarmed him personally, then had his men tie up the whole crew. It was over. Grant climbed down from the rocks, his shoulder throbbing but his face calm. Elsie followed, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Drummond shook Grant's hand and thanked him, then offered him a job as a railroad detective. Grant just smiled and said he had other plans. The train rolled on toward its destination, and Drummond took Wainwright and his men back to Whispering Pines under guard. Grant and Elsie rode back slowly, letting the horses pick their way through the dark. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Elsie broke the silence.
What happens now?
Now we go home,
Where's home?
wherever you are.
Elsie looked over at him, her heart pounding.
You mean that?
I've never meant anything more.
They rode into Whispering Pines just before dawn. The town was stirring, people already working to rebuild. Word of Wainwright's capture had spread, and there was a cautious relief in the air. Grant and Elsie stopped at the livery to tend the horses, and then Grant turned to her with a serious expression.
I need to tell you something. That telegram I got, the one that came too late, it was about my brother. The man who shot me wasn't just a thief. He was working for the people who killed my family. I spent 2 years tracking him, and I finally got word he was in Denver. But by the time I could move, he was gone again.
And you've been chasing him ever since.
I was. But somewhere along the way I realized I was chasing a ghost and missing my life. Then I met you, and everything changed.
What are you saying?
I'm saying I'm done running. I'm done with vengeance. I want a life, Elsie. A real life. With you.
Elsie felt tears prick her eyes. She'd spent so long pretending to be someone she wasn't, so long hiding and running, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen.
I'm not who everyone thinks I am.
I know.
You know,
I've known for a while. You're not Margot Hale. You're Elsie Brennan, and you're running from something. I don't care what it is.
how did you know?
The way you flinch when someone calls you Margot. The way you watch the stage road like you're expecting someone. The way you carry yourself, like you're used to hard work and making your own way. Margot Hale was a city girl with family money. You're a homesteader's daughter.
Elsie let out a shaky breath.
I took her ticket when she decided not to come west. She paid me to disappear, and I needed to disappear. There were men back in Missouri, claim jumpers who killed my father and wanted our land. I testified against them, and they swore they'd find me. So, I ran.
And you've been running ever since.
Until now.
Until now.
Grant reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused and solid.
We can face them together. Whatever comes,
You'd do that for me?
I'd do anything for you.
Elsie stepped closer, and Grant wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her tight against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong.
I love you, Grant Fletcher.
I love you too, Elsie Brennan.
They stood there in the dusty livery as the sun rose over Whispering Pines. Two people who'd been running from their pasts, finally ready to stand still. The town needed rebuilding. There would be hard work ahead, and probably more trouble down the road. But they'd face it together. That afternoon they walked out to the edge of town, where an old cottonwood tree stood on a bluff overlooking the valley. Someone had left blankets there, and Grant spread them out in the shade. Elsie made coffee over a small fire, and they sat together watching the wind move through the grass below.
What do you want to do?
I want to stay here. Build something real.
A homestead.
Maybe. Or a business. I'm good with numbers, and I can manage things. This town is going to grow.
It is. And it'll need good people.
What about you? What do you want?
I want to be wherever you are. I can work as a guard, or help you build whatever you're building. I'm handy with carpentry.
You are.
I am.
Elsie smiled and leaned against his good shoulder. Grant kissed the top of her head, and they sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the clouds move across the sky. The wind had finally died down completely, leaving the air clear and still. Somewhere in town, a hammer rang out. Someone starting repairs. Life going on.
Grant,
Yeah.
thank you for choosing me over vengeance.
Wasn't even a choice, Elsie. You're the only choice I'll ever need.
She turned and kissed him then, soft and slow and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The hard season was coming. Winter would be brutal up here in the mountains, but they'd face it together. That was enough. That was everything. She was mistaken for someone else, and he chose love over vengeance. In 1877, Whispering Pines, Arkansas, a homesteader woman hiding under a false identity crosses paths with a wounded stagecoach guard running from his own demons. When a violent windstorm traps them together, and a claim jumper's plot threatens to destroy the town, they must decide whether to keep running or stand and fight. A telegram arrives too late and changes everything, forcing him to choose between vengeance and the woman he loves. This is a story of survival, second chances, and finding home in the most unexpected place. Subscribe for more authentic Wild West romance stories. D up at the engineer, where they're supposed to me, Latsings was selft, so lost around her. Dementling the story, where there are not him. Their rest place were lost in logs white. Then tired. Going let dranding at Insigan after. I also might have done all the calming in the Blackspore stores, the Tory, the Steins.
Stop the train! There's men waiting in the pass to rob you.
The engineer leaned out, squinting down at them. Who are you?
Doesn't matter who I am. There's 8 armed men about to blow your tracks and take your payroll car. You need to back up and go around through Miller's Junction.
The engineer hesitated, then must have seen something in Grant's face that convinced him. He pulled the brake, and the train shuddered to a halt, with a screech of metal on metal. Grant and Elsie rode alongside as the engineer climbed down with 2 railroad guards.
They'll be here any minute. You need to reverse now.
One of the guards, a gray-haired man with a shotgun, shook his head. We can't back up. The siding's 10 miles south. If we try to reverse, we'll block the whole line for hours.
Better than getting robbed and killed.
The guard looked at his partner, then back at Grant. We've got 4 guards on this train and a strong box full of mining payroll. If what you're saying is true, we'll make a stand.
There's 8 of them, and they know this pass.
The guard's eyes shifted to Elsie, and his expression hardened. Ma'am, you should get clear. This isn't your fight.
I'm staying.
Grant didn't argue. He knew better. The guards moved quickly, positioning themselves along the train and checking their weapons. Grant and Elsie took cover behind a boulder near the tracks, watching the Southern approach. The light was fading fast now, purple shadows filling the pass. Then they heard the hoofbeats again, closer this time, and Wainwright's men came around the bend at a gallop. They saw the stopped train and pulled up short, clearly surprised. Wainwright himself was in the lead, his neat gray suit looking out of place on horseback. He raised one hand, and his men spread out, surrounding the train. Stand down! This train is under our protection. Wainwright's voice carried clearly in the still air. I don't think so. We're taking the payroll car. Nobody needs to get hurt if you just step aside. The lead guard raised his shotgun. We're not stepping aside. Turn around and ride out. Wainwright smiled, cold and calculated. I was hoping you'd say that. He dropped his hand, and his men opened fire. The pass exploded with gunshots, echoing off the rocks like thunder. Grant pulled Elsie down behind the boulder as bullets whined overhead. He returned fire with his revolver, taking careful aim despite the pain in his shoulder. One of Wainwright's men went down, then another. The railroad guards were holding their own, using the train cars for cover. But Wainwright's men had position and numbers. They were pushing forward, trying to flank the guards and get to the payroll car. Grant saw the plan unfolding and knew they had to stop it.
Stay here.
Like hell.
Elsie pulled her father's old pistol from her coat and checked the cylinder. Grant looked at her. This stubborn, beautiful woman who'd lied her way into his life and somehow become the truest thing in it. And he knew he loved her. No time to say it now, but he'd say it later if they both lived. They moved together, circling wide to come up on Wainwright's flank. The rocks gave them cover, and the failing light helped. They got within 20 yards before one of Wainwright's men spotted them and shouted a warning. Grant shot him before he could raise his rifle. Elsie fired twice, forcing another man to dive for cover. Now Wainwright's group was caught between the train guards and Grant's position, and the fight turned. 2 more of Wainwright's men broke and ran, spurring their horses back down the pass. Wainwright himself dismounted and took cover behind a fallen log, still firing with mechanical precision. Fletcher, I know that's you. Wainwright's voice cut through the gunfire. You should have stayed out of this.
Should have. Didn't.
Grant moved closer, using the rocks for cover. Wainwright fired again, and the bullet sparked off stone inches from Grant's head. Elsie came up on the other side, forcing Wainwright to split his attention. The woman too! The lying homesteader! Wainwright's composure was cracking now, his voice rising. You think you can stop this? I've already sold this town! The deal is done!
Then you don't need the payroll.
Wainwright laughed, high and bitter. I need every cent I can get. Do you know what it costs to buy a future?
Don't care. Put the gun down.
Wainwright stood up suddenly, his pistol aimed at Elsie. Grant didn't think, just fired. Wainwright staggered back and dropped his gun, clutching his side. The fight went out of him all at once, and he sank to his knees in the dirt, his neat suit finally ruined. The last of his men threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The railroad guards moved in to secure them. Grant crossed to Wainwright and kicked his pistol away.
It's over.
Wainwright looked up at him, blood seeping between his fingers and his face twisted with rage. Nothing's over. The investors will send more men. They'll take this town whether I'm alive or dead.
Let them try.
Grant turned away. Elsie was standing by the boulder, her pistol still in her hand, her face pale but steady. He went to her, and she lowered the gun.
Is it really over?
This part is.
The train engineer approached, his expression grateful and shaken. Thank you. Both of you. That payroll would have bankrupted half the miners in 3 counties.
Get it to where it's going.
The engineer nodded and climbed back aboard. The guards loaded Wainwright and his men onto the train to be delivered to the law in the next town. Within minutes, the train was moving again, chugging slowly through the pass and disappearing into the twilight. Grant and Elsie stood alone in the quiet, the smell of gun smoke still hanging in the air.
We should head back.
Yeah.
They rode back to Whispering Pines under a sky full of stars. The wind finally gone. The world feeling new and clean. When they reached town, it was late, and most people were asleep. They returned the horses to the livery and walked together through the empty streets. At the boarding house, Elsie stopped and turned to face him.
What happens now?
I don't know. I've been running so long I forgot how to stand still.
Maybe it's time to learn.
Maybe it is.
He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear.
Elsie, I need to tell you something.
I know.
You know.
I know you love me. And I love you'd up the warning, but the sound of gunfire drowned him out. Wainwright's men had spotted them and opened fire from the rocks above. Grant yanked Elsie down behind a boulder as bullets ricocheted off stone.
Stay low.
He drew his revolver and returned fire, forcing the attackers to take cover. The train screeched to a halt, steam hissing from the brakes. Railroad guards poured out of the cars, rifles ready. Now it was a standoff. Wainwright's men trapped between Grant and the guards. The firefight lasted only minutes but felt longer. Wainwright's men were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, they threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Grant kept his revolver trained on them as the guards moved in. Then Wainwright himself appeared from behind the rocks, immaculate even now in his dark suit, his expression cold and controlled. He wasn't holding a weapon, but his hand rested near his coat pocket.
It's over. Wainwright.
Wainwright smiled thinly. You're the guard from the stage. Fletcher, I should have killed you when I had the chance.
You tried.
Wainwright's eyes shifted to Elsie. And the woman. The one who's been lying about who she is. Did you tell him, Miss Brennan? Did you tell him you're wanted back east for stealing from your employer? Elsie stood up, her chin high.
I took back wages he refused to pay. Money I earned.
Wainwright laughed. The law doesn't see it that way.
I don't care what the law sees. I'm done running.
So am I.
Grant stepped forward, his revolver steady on Wainwright. Wainwright's hand moved toward his pocket, and Grant fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet.
Don't.
Wainwright froze. The railroad guards closed in, and one of them pulled a small derringer from Wainwright's pocket. The villain's neat appearance was finally disturbed, dust on his knees, his carefully combed hair falling across his forehead. He looked up at Grant with pure hatred. "You've ruined everything."
No. You did that yourself.
One of the guards spoke up, his voice hard. "Satterfield Wainwright, you're under arrest for attempted robbery and conspiracy." Wainwright didn't resist as they pulled him to his feet and bound his hands. He kept his eyes on Grant. "This isn't finished."
Yes, it is.
They loaded Wainwright and his men onto the train. The engineer thanked Grant and Elsie personally, shaking their hands with genuine gratitude. The train pulled away slowly, heading east with its cargo secure. Grant and Elsie stood in the pass as darkness settled, the only sound the wind through the pines.
Is it really over?
This part is.
What about the telegram? The one about your brother?
I read it. Charlie's alive. He's been in a hospital in Denver recovering from his wounds. He sent word to find me.
Then, you need to go to him.
I will, but not alone.
He turned to face her fully, his green eyes steady on hers.
Come with me, Elsie.
Grant.
I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few days. But I also know I don't want to face another day without you.
What about my claim? My homestead?
Bring it with you. Or sell it. Or we come back here after I see Charlie. I don't care about the details, Elsie. I care about you.
She looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd chosen her over vengeance, who'd stood beside her when the world tried to bury them both.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I'll come with you. Yes to all of it.
Grant pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and certain, and she melted against him. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. They rode back to Whispering Pines through the quiet night, the stars bright overhead. The storm finally passed. The town was still a mess, buildings damaged and streets torn up. But people would rebuild. They always did. At the boarding house, they said goodnight, and Grant promised to come back at first light. Elsie went inside and lay awake for a long time, her heart full of hope for the first time in years. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Grant met her with 2 horses packed and ready. They rode out together, heading east toward Denver and Charlie, and whatever came next. At the edge of town, they stopped beneath the old cottonwood tree, the same one where they'd sat drinking coffee just days before. Someone had left blankets there again, and they spread them out in the morning sun. Elsie made coffee over a small fire while Grant checked the horses. They sat together on the blankets, shoulder to shoulder, watching the light spread across the valley below.
You ready for this?
I'm ready for anything as long as you're with me.
Same here.
They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. 2 people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to hold on. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but they'd face it together. Grant stood and offered his hand. Elsie took it and let him pull her to her feet. They rolled up the blankets, kicked dirt over the fire, and mounted their horses. One last look at Whispering Pines, and then they turned east and rode toward their future, side by side, ready for whatever the next season would bring.